Welcome to Shiver Audiobooks. We're glad you've joined us on the coast. Before we cross the water to a place where the air remembers everything, take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support ensures that the silence never lasts too long. On Echo Island, the past is never dead. It's just waiting for its turn to speak. One group of friends is about to learn that when you hear a scream from yesterday that you didn't make, the nightmare hasn't just begun, it's already caught up to you. Sync your watches, hold your breath, and try to stay quiet. This is Echo Island.
Chapter 1. The Delayed Shiver. The fog didn't just sit on the water. It felt like it was breathing. It was a thick, sentient gray blanket that swallowed the jagged edges of the skiff and made the Atlantic Ocean feel like a bowl of cold soup. To Elias, the mist felt heavy, as if it were saturated with more than just moisture, as if it were holding on to something. Elias stood on the edge of the rotting pier, the wood groaning under his boots like a dying animal. His watch showed exactly 4 p.m. Beside him, Julian was busy securing the ropes of their rented skiff, his movements frantic and efficient. Isabel and Chloe were already hauling their gear toward the only structure on the island, a weathered stone lighthouse that stood on the highest point of the black basalt cliffs. It looked like a broken tooth sticking out of the gums of a giant. "Do you hear that?" Chloe asked suddenly, stopping dead in her tracks. Her voice was thin, easily lost in the mist. "Hear what?" Julian grunted, wiping salt spray from his forehead. He didn't look up, focused on the knot in his hands. "Exactly," Chloe whispered, her eyes darting toward the treeless horizon. "Nothing. No gulls. No wind. No waves hitting the rocks. It's like the island is holding its breath." Elias felt it too, a strange, uncomfortable pressure in his ears, similar to the sensation of a plane descending too fast. He knew the legends of Echo Island. The locals in the mainland pubs spoke about the acoustic rift, with a mixture of awe and superstition. Geologists called it a lithic resonance, a rare phenomenon where the unique mineral composition of the island's cliffs acted like a natural recording device. But the recording had a flaw, or perhaps a design, a fixed 24-hour latency, a physical echo held in the air by the magnetic pull of the island, delayed by a full rotation of the Earth. "Let's test the theory," Julian said, his bravado returning as he finally finished with the ropes. He stood up, cupped his hands around his mouth, and bellowed toward the towering cliffs with a grin. "Hello, Lonely Rock!" The sound vanished into the fog. There was no immediate bounce back, no fading resonance, just a flat, dead silence that seemed to eat the words whole. It was as if the island had swallowed his voice and was digesting it. "Creepy," Isabel muttered, shrugging her backpack higher. "So we won't hear that until tomorrow at 4 to the second." "That's the theory," Elias said, checking his watch again. "The rift is precise. Tomorrow we'll be sitting here, and Julian's voice will just manifest, like a ghost in the machine." They spent the next few hours trekking up to the lighthouse. It was a grim building, the interior smelling of kerosene and ancient damp. The stairs were a spiral of cold iron that echoed with every step. Though Elias knew those echoes wouldn't stay in the room, they were being absorbed into the very walls, waiting for their 24-hour sentence to be served. By 8 p.m., they had managed to get a fire going in the hearth of the living quarters. The crackle of dry wood was the only rhythm in the vast, misty void. They sat in a circle, the firelight casting long, dancing shadows against the stone walls. They laughed, they shared stories, and eventually they made a pact. "At 8 p.m. tomorrow, we stay silent," Chloe proposed, her eyes gleaming. "No talking, no moving. We just sit here and listen to the yesterday version of us. We'll hear this exact conversation." They all agreed, raising their tin cups in a toast. But as Elias drifted off to sleep later that night on a thin, musty mattress, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Not by eyes, but by ears. If every sound was recorded, then the island was a library of every secret, every whisper, and every scream that had happened 24 hours ago. He closed his eyes, listening to the heavy silence of the night. Somewhere out there in the fog, the island was busy recording them. But as the clock ticked past midnight, Elias wondered, what if someone else had been here yesterday? What if the recording they were about to hear didn't belong to them at all? He didn't know then that at 10:14 p.m. the next day, the library would open its doors to a nightmare. Chapter 2: The Unscheduled Ghost. The second day on the island began with an eerie, artificial sense of peace. The sun was a pale, heatless disk behind the clouds, and the fog had retreated just enough to reveal the coastline, a jagged graveyard of black rocks and tide pools that looked like spilled oil. They spent the morning exploring, but the atmosphere was tense. Every time someone spoke, they were aware that their words were being stored. Julian tried to make a joke of it, shouting insults at the empty air, but even his laughter felt forced. At 3:59 p.m., the group gathered on the pier, their watches synchronized. The anticipation was thick. 5 seconds. Elias counted down. 4, 3, 2, 1. At exactly 4 p.m., it happened. From the empty air toward the cliffs, a voice boomed, crisp, clear, and perfectly preserved. "Hello, Lonely Rock!" Julian jumped, despite having been the one to shout it. The sound was uncanny. It didn't sound like a recording played through speakers. It sounded like Julian was standing right there, invisible, shouting into the wind. "It works," Isabel whispered, her face a mask of wonder. "It actually works." For the next few hours, the novelty was intoxicating. They followed the echoes of their arrival like a trail of breadcrumbs. They heard the clatter of their gear from 24 hours ago, the sound of their heavy breathing as they climbed the path, and Isabel complaining about the dampness of the lighthouse. It was like living alongside a transparent, auditory version of themselves. But as the sun began to set, the fun curdled into something else. By 10 p.m., they were back in the lighthouse kitchen. They had prepared for their silent pact. They sat around the wooden table, the only light coming from a single lantern. At 10:05 p.m., they heard the echo of Julian opening a bottle of wine from the night before. At 10:08 p.m., they heard Chloe's laughter. Then came 10:14 p.m. The kitchen was dead silent in the present, but the air suddenly filled with a sound that made Elias's blood turn to ice. It wasn't their voices. It came from the base of the lighthouse stairs, just outside the kitchen door. "Please, stop, please." It was a woman's voice, high-pitched, raw with a terror so visceral it felt like a physical blow. Then came the sound of a heavy struggle, the thud of a body hitting stone, the frantic scraping of fingernails against wood, and finally, the scream. It wasn't just a scream. It was a soul-shattering shriek that ended in a wet, gurgling choke. The kitchen fell into a deathly, suffocating silence. Elias looked at Isabel, Julian, and Chloe. Their faces were ash-white in the lantern light. Isabel was trembling so hard her chair rattled against the floor. "We didn't." Isabel's voice was a ghost of itself. "We weren't here in the kitchen at 10:14 p.m. yesterday. We were outside by the fire. And none of you ass." Julian swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the empty, dark doorway. "None of us sounds like that. That wasn't any of you." Elias looked at his watch. 10:16 p.m. The echo had ended. "The island doesn't lie," Elias whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "The rift is absolute. If we're hearing that now, it means it happened exactly 24 hours ago. Someone else was in this lighthouse last night. Someone was murdered right on those stairs while we were sitting outside by the fire. But we would have seen them. Chloe cried, her voice rising in panic. We would have seen their boat. We would have heard them. No, Elias realized, the cold weight of the realization settling in his gut. We couldn't have heard it yesterday. The sound was being recorded into the rift. It was being held between the lines of time. The murder was silent yesterday, but it's loud today. Then a new thought, sharper and more terrifying, entered his mind. Wait, Julian said, his eyes darting to the dark window where the fog was pressing against the glass. If someone was murdered here yesterday, where is the body? We've been all over this lighthouse today. We found nothing. Elias stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, through the thickening fog, he saw something that made his breath hitch. A faint, rhythmic flash of light, not from a lighthouse, but from a flashlight. Someone was moving across the black rocks, heading toward the pier. The echo tells us what happened yesterday, Elias said, his voice trembling. But it also tells us what's coming. If the killer was here 24 hours ago, and we didn't see him leave, he's still here. And he knows exactly where we'll be standing tomorrow. Chapter 3. The Cold Spot. The flashlight beam in the distance didn't just flicker. It pulsed with a predatory rhythm. Elias watched it for a long count of 10 before the fog, like a closing curtain, swallowed the light again. He stayed at the window, his forehead pressed against the cold, salt-crusted glass, waiting for his breath to fog up the view so he wouldn't have to look at the darkness anymore. Elias, get away from the window, Julian hissed. He was standing in the center of the kitchen, clutching a heavy iron fire poker he'd scavenged from the hearth. His knuckles were white, and the bravado that had defined him on the mainland was gone, replaced by a twitchy, frantic energy. He's right, Isabel whispered, pulling her knees to her chest on the wooden bench. If we can see the light, whoever is holding it can see us. We're sitting in a lantern-lit box. Elias turned back to the room. The air felt different now. The 10:14 p.m. scream had tainted the atmosphere. Every shadow in the corner of the kitchen looked like a crouching figure. Every creak of the lighthouse's iron skeleton sounded like the beginning of a struggle. We need to find out where that sound came from, Elias said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his hands. Exactly where? Why? Chloe snapped, her eyes wide and wet with unshed tears. We heard it. It happened at the stairs. Isn't that enough? We need to get to the boat and get off this rock. We can't, Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. The tide is out, and the fog is too thick. If we hit the teeth, those rocks near the inlet, without visibility, we're dead in minutes. We're stuck here until dawn. Elias is right, Isabel said, standing up shakily. If the island records everything with a 24-hour delay, then the past is our only map. If we can find the spot where the sound was loudest, we might find something, a clue, a reason why we didn't see a body today. They moved as a single unit, huddled together, with Elias leading the way, holding the lantern high. They stepped out of the kitchen and into the narrow hallway that led to the central spiral staircase. This was the spot. Elias lowered the lantern. The light washed over the gray stone floor and the first 3 steps of the iron stairs. Yesterday at 10:14 p.m., they had been sitting outside by the fire, drinking beer and laughing. They had looked at the lighthouse from the outside and seen only a dark, silent silhouette. The scream sounded like she was being pushed, Chloe whispered, hugging herself. Pushed against the wall. Elias leaned in closer to the wall. The stone was cold, but as he moved the lantern along the baseboard, he noticed something. A thin, jagged line in the masonry. It wasn't a crack from age. It was too straight, too deliberate. Julian, help me with this, Elias commanded. They pushed against the stone block. It didn't budge at first, but then, with a heavy, grinding sound that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. The wall gave way. It wasn't a door. It was a pivot, a hidden alcove built into the hollow space beneath the stairs. A blast of stale, freezing air hit them. It smelled of old copper and something sweet, like rotting lilies. Elias stepped inside, the lantern light struggling to pierce the absolute darkness of the small room. It was barely 6 feet wide, a stone cell hidden from the world. And then it happened. As they stepped into the hidden room, the silence of the lighthouse vanished. But it wasn't an echo from yesterday. Inside this room, they heard a sound that shouldn't exist in the acoustic rift. It was the sound of someone breathing. Slow, labored, deep. It wasn't coming from the air around them. It was coming from the walls themselves. "Is that an echo from yesterday?" Isabel whispered, her voice trembling. Elias looked at his watch. 10:28 p.m. "No," he breathed, his face turning ashen. "Think about it. Yesterday, we were exploring the island. This room was sealed. It was silent. There should be nothing to hear right now." "Then what are we hearing?" Julian asked, his fire poker trembling. Elias reached out and touched the stone wall. The breathing grew louder, more intimate. It wasn't an echo of the past. The hidden room acted as a reverse acoustic pocket. Because of the way the stones were cut, this room didn't record the past. It amplified the present from elsewhere in the building. "It's not yesterday," Elias whispered, the lantern shaking in his grip. "This is real time. Someone is breathing right now, deep inside the ventilation shafts of this lighthouse." But as he moved the lantern to the back of the small room, the light hit the floor, and Chloe let out a muffled shriek. On the ground lay a yellow rain slicker, identical to the ones they had seen in the mainland shops. It was shredded, soaked in a dark, brownish-red stain that hadn't quite dried. Elias knelt down and touched the fabric. It was cold. "The woman who screamed," Elias said, looking up at his friends. "She wasn't a stranger." He pulled the slicker aside to reveal a small, waterproof ID badge clipped to the pocket. The photo on the badge was faded, but the name was clear. Dr. Anna Richter, Acoustic Research Lead. "Anna Richter," Isabel gasped. "The woman who discovered the rift. She went missing 3 years ago. They said she drowned." "She didn't drown," Elias said, looking at the stone walls that continued to breathe with the rhythm of an invisible occupant. "She's been here, and according to the echo we just heard, she was still alive exactly 24 hours ago." Suddenly, the breathing stopped. A new sound replaced it. A soft, metallic clink, the sound of a key turning in a lock, not in the room with them. But the door to the kitchen, the one they had just left open, slammed shut with a violence that echoed through the entire lighthouse. "Yesterday's killer?" Julian yelled, spinning around. "No," Elias said, pointing his lantern toward the narrow slit in the hidden door. "Yesterday is over. That was today." Chapter 4. Acoustic Shadows. The sound of the kitchen door slamming wasn't an echo. It was a sharp, definitive crack that severed their connection to the only exit. In the claustrophobic silence of the hidden alcove, the four of them stood frozen, the rhythmic breathing from the walls now replaced by a chilling, expectant stillness. "He's in the kitchen," Chloe whispered, her voice barely a thread of air. "He waited for us to come in here. He trapped us." "We don't know that," Julian argued, though he gripped the fire poker so hard his knuckles looked like white stones. "It could have been the wind. This place is a ruin." "The wind doesn't turn a key, Julian," Elias replied. He turned the lantern toward the heavy stone pivot door. There was no handle on the inside, no latch. It was designed to disappear, and if Dr. Anna Richter was kept here, it wasn't because she wanted to be. "This is a cell." Elias began to examine the stone walls of the alcove more closely. The sweet, rotting scent of lilies was stronger here, mingling with the metallic tang of the blood-stained rain slicker. He realized the breathing they had heard wasn't just coming from the vents. The entire room was a giant ear, a focal point where the lighthouse's strange geometry gathered every vibration from the upper floors. "Listen," Elias commanded, raising a finger. From the walls came a soft, rhythmic thump-drag. "Thump-drag. Someone is moving on the floor above us," Isabel noted, her eyes tracking the ceiling. "Real time. They're slow, deliberate. If they're above us, we have a chance to get back to the hallway," Elias said. He shoved his weight against the pivot door. It didn't budge. "Julian, give me a hand. On 3. 1, 2, 3. With a jagged, grinding protest, the stone wall swung open just a few inches, enough for Elias to see back into the hallway. It was empty. The lantern light spilled out, casting long, distorted shadows against the iron spiral stairs. "Go! Go! Go!" Elias hissed. They squeezed out of the alcove, their movements frantic but hushed. The air in the hallway felt icy. As they stood at the base of the stairs, the 24-hour rift decided to remind them of its presence. "Is it just me, or is the fire getting warmer?" It was Isabel's voice. From yesterday, 10:35 p.m. The echo was surreal. Yesterday they had been sitting outside, 20 yards away from where they now stood, yet the island's resonance was so powerful it felt like yesterday Isabel was standing right next to today Isabel. "It's the driftwood," Julian's echo replied. "Burns hotter. Pass me another beer, Chloe." Hearing their own happy, oblivious voices while standing in the shadow of a hidden murder cell was nauseating. It was a cruel juxtaposition, the safety of the past mocking the terror of the present. "We need to get to the radio room," Elias said, pointing up the stairs. "If the kitchen is blocked, the only way out is up, or through the service hatch in the lantern room." "We're going up." Chloe looked at the dark spiral, but the thump-drag sound came from up there. "We have no choice," Elias insisted. "But we have an advantage. The echoes. How is hearing us drink beer an advantage?" Julian snapped. "Not our echoes," Elias clarified, his eyes gleaming with a desperate intelligence. If Dr. Richter was murdered at 10:14 p.m. yesterday, the killer had to move after that. He had to hide the body. He had to clean the stairs. If we stay quiet and listen to the yesterday feed, we can hear exactly where he went. We can use his past movements to avoid his present location. They began to climb, their boots making no sound on the iron steps as they moved in perfect synchronization with the rhythmic echoes of their past selves climbing the stairs to bed. At 10:40 p.m., a new sound entered the rift. It wasn't their voices. It was a heavy, metallic dragging sound coming from the third-floor landing. "Scree, scree, that's him," Elias whispered. "Yesterday's killer. He's moving the body." The sound was agonizingly slow. In the present, the lighthouse was silent, but in the acoustic rift, the past was a riot of evidence. They reached the second-floor landing just as the echo of the killer passed them in the timeline. They felt a chill, a cold spot, in the air where the sound seemed to condense. Suddenly, the echo changed. The dragging stopped. "I know you can hear me." The voice was deep, raspy, and filled with a terrifying calm. It didn't sound like it was coming from the past. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere. "Is that an echo?" Chloe whispered, her breath hitching. I don't know." Elias stammered. He checked his watch. 10:44 p.m. Yesterday at 10:44 p.m., they had been laughing loudly by the fire. Their own echo should be drowning everything out. But the rift was silent of their voices. The island doesn't just record. The voice continued, now louder, vibrating through the iron railing Elias was holding. It remembers, and it hates a witness. Elias looked at the walls. The stone was beginning to vibrate. He realized with a jolt of horror that the twist of the hidden room was more dangerous than he thought. The island wasn't just playing back the past. The mineral composition was reaching a saturation point. The present and the past were starting to bleed together. Elias. Isabel pointed down the stairs. The kitchen door, the one that had been locked from the outside, was slowly swinging open, but there was no one there. Instead, a thick, black liquid began to seep out from under the doorframe, flowing upward against gravity, following the sound of the voice. "That's not blood," Julian whispered, raising the fire poker. That's the mineral oil from the cliffs." "The island is waking up," Elias realized. "The acoustic shadows aren't just sounds. They're becoming physical." As if to prove him right, the echo of the 10:14 p.m. scream started again, but this time it didn't come from the stairs. It came from inside Elias's own throat. Even though his mouth was shut tight, he felt his vocal cords vibrate with a scream that wasn't his, a phantom pain lancing through his chest. "Run!" Elias choked out, the stolen scream still echoing in his chest. To the top. Now, they scrambled up the final flight of stairs, the iron steps now slick with the rising black oil. Behind them, the shadows of the past began to take shape, translucent, vibrating figures made of sound and fog, repeating the movements of a murder that was no longer content to stay in the yesterday. Chapter 5. The Recording Angel. The climb to the lantern room was a vertical nightmare. The iron stairs, once solid and dependable, now felt like the ribcage of a leviathan. Every step Elias took sent a metallic ring through the structure, but those sounds were immediately swallowed by the chaotic symphony of the rift. Behind them, the black mineral oil continued its impossible ascent, a silent, viscous tide that seemed to be drawn upward by the sheer volume of the echoes. They burst into the lantern room, the highest point of the lighthouse. The massive glass lenses, designed to throw light miles into the Atlantic, were cracked and clouded with salt. In the center sat the heavy clockwork mechanism that once rotated the lamp. It was frozen, its brass gears choked with the same black sludge that was currently chasing them up the stairs. "Lock the hatch," Julian yelled, slamming the heavy iron grate shut. He threw his entire weight onto it, while Isabel and Chloe shoved a heavy oak desk over the top. The silence that followed was brittle. Elias stood by the glass, his lungs burning. Outside, the fog had turned into a swirling vortex, illuminated from within by strange, pale flashes of static. The island was no longer just a place. It was an event. "Elias, look," Isabel whispered, pointing to the desk they had just moved. Taped to the underside of the desk was a leather-bound journal, protected from the damp by layers of waxed canvas. Elias pulled it free. The leather was cracked, and the pages were yellowed, but the handwriting was sharp, frantic, and densely packed. The log of Abelard Vane, station keeper, 1922 to 1924. Elias flipped through the pages. The early entries were mundane. Weather reports, oil shipments, the crushing loneliness of the Atlantic. But as the months progressed, the ink became darker, the script more erratic. October 14th. The stone is singing again. It does not reflect the sound. It holds it. I spoke to my wife this morning. She died 3 years ago on the mainland. I heard her voice in the pantry. Not a memory, a physical vibration. The rift is opening. It is a hunger. November 2nd. I have found the frequency. The mineral in the cliffs, the echo stone, is a superconductor for temporal resonance. If you vibrate the stone at the correct pitch, the 24-hour delay is not a limit. It is a loop. I have heard my own death 3 times this week. Each time, it is closer. He found a way to loop it, Elias breathed, his eyes scanning the technical drawings in the margins. Vane wasn't just recording. He was building a recording angel, a device to trap sounds forever. "Do you think they can hear us yet?" The voice exploded in the room. It was Julian's voice. But it wasn't the echo from yesterday. It was deeper, distorted, as if his words were being shredded by a fan. "I didn't say that," Julian whispered, backing away from his own voice. "I'm standing right here, and I didn't say a word." They are looking at the book. They think the keeper is dead. Elias felt a cold sweat break across his skin. He looked at the journal. "Julian, that's not an echo of the past." He looked at the date on the top of the page, February 6th, 2026. The current date. It's the twist. The rift isn't just 24 hours behind anymore. The recording angel mechanism in the floor, it's malfunctioning. It's recording us now and playing it back seconds later. We're being trapped in a feedback loop. We're being trapped in a feedback loop. The walls repeated, the stone vibrating so hard that a hairline crack appeared in one of the lighthouse lenses. "We have to stop the mechanism," Elias shouted over the rising roar of their own repeated voices. Vane's notes say the recording angel is beneath the lens pedestal. It's a vibrating plate made of pure echo stone. He dropped to his knees, tearing at the floorboards. Beneath the brass gears of the lamp, he found it, a circular plate of dark, shimmering mineral, pulsating with a rhythmic violet light. It looked like a heart made of glass. But as he reached out to shatter it, Isabel grabbed his arm. Her eyes were fixed on the journal. "Elias, wait. Look at the last entry." He looked. The ink was still wet, as if it had been written seconds ago. To break the angel is to break the seal. The 24-hour rift is the only thing keeping the others at bay. If the loop stops, the past doesn't disappear. It all comes back at once. 100 years of screams, 100 years of murder, all in a single second. A heavy thud hit the iron hatch. Something was on the other side. Not the black oil. Something solid. Thump drag, thump drag. "The killer from yesterday," Chloe whimpered. "He's at the door. He's at the door." The room echoed, the voice now a 1,000-man choir of their own terrified whispers. Elias looked at the shimmering plate, then at the hatch. If he broke the stone, they would be flooded with a century of horror. If he didn't, the man who murdered Dr. Richter would walk through that door in the present. Through the salt-crusted glass, a figure appeared on the outdoor gallery, standing in the fog. It wasn't a ghost. It was a woman, her clothes soaked, her eyes burning with a cold, blue light. It was Dr. Anna Richter. She wasn't dead, but she wasn't entirely human. She held a tuning fork against the glass, and as she struck it, the recording angel beneath Elias's feet let out a high-pitched shriek that shattered every window in the lantern room. "The loop is not a prison." Anna's voice drifted in through the broken glass, clear and terrifying. "It's an invitation. Welcome to the forever, Elias." Chapter 6. Static and Bone. The explosion of glass was a symphony of crystalline needles. As the windows of the lantern room shattered outward, the pressurized atmosphere of the rift collided with the frigid Atlantic gale. The screaming feedback of the recording angel died abruptly, replaced by the roar of the wind and the rhythmic, terrifying thrum of the tuning fork in Dr. Anna Richter's hand. She stood on the gallery, the fog swirling around her like a shroud. Her skin had a translucent, pearlescent quality, and where her veins should have been, there were thin, glowing lines of violet, the exact color of the echo stone. "Anna," Isabel whispered, shielding her eyes from the wind. "We found your slicker. We heard the scream. We thought you were murdered." Anna Richter stepped through the jagged frame of the broken window, her boots crunching on the glass. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a conductor. "The scream was a necessity," Anna said, her voice resonant and multi-layered, as if she were speaking through several timelines at once. "The rift requires a catalyst to open. High-frequency emotion, terror, specifically, is the most efficient fuel. I didn't die, Isabel. I simply moved into the latency." "You're behind the rift," Elias realized, clutching the journal to his chest. You're not living 24 hours behind us. You're living inside the delay. I am the static, she replied, raising the tuning fork. And you four are the bone, the physical anchors. I need to bring the forever into the now. Below them, the iron hatch began to buckle. The thump-drag sound was no longer an echo. It was a heavy, rhythmic battering. Julian lunged toward the desk they had used to barricade the hatch, but a sudden pulse of sound from Anna's tuning fork sent him flying across the room. He slammed into the lens mechanism, the air rushing out of his lungs in a pained gasp. "Julian!" Chloe screamed. "Julian!" The room screamed back, a jagged, distorted repetition that felt like it was tearing the air apart. "Stop it!" Elias yelled at Anna. "Vane's journal says if you break the seal, a century of horror comes back. You'll kill everyone on the mainland." "The mainland is a world of fading echoes," Anna said, her eyes fixed on the shimmering plate of echo stone in the floor. "Here, nothing is ever lost. Every word ever spoken on this island is still vibrating in the rock. I am not breaking a seal, Elias. I am completing a circuit." She knelt by the pedestal, the violet light from the stone reflecting in her pupils. She began to hum a low, discordant frequency that matched the vibration of the lighthouse itself. Suddenly, the floor beneath them turned transparent. Through the glowing, translucent stone, they saw the twist of the lighthouse's foundation. It wasn't built on rock. The entire structure was resting on a massive, compacted mound of human remains, thousands of skeletons, their bones interwoven like a macabre tapestry, were fused together by the black mineral oil. "Static and bone," Elias whispered, his stomach turning. "The minerals in the cliffs. They don't just record sound. They need a biological medium. This isn't a natural phenomenon. The island is a graveyard designed to store data." "Abelard Vane knew," Anna murmured, her humming growing louder. "He didn't just record his wife. He tried to bring her back by feeding the stone, but he ran out of medium. You four, however, you are so full of life, so much potential resonance." The hatch finally gave way. The oak desk was tossed aside like a toy. A figure emerged from the darkness of the stairs. It was a man, but his body was a nightmare of latency. He flickered in and out of existence, his face a shifting mask of a dozen different men from different eras. He held a rusted maritime hook, and as he moved, he left a trail of static in the air. "The keeper," Elias breathed. "That's Vane. He's the one who's been thumping and dragging for 100 years. The keeper didn't attack Anna. He looked at her with a hollow, subservient longing. He was the physical manifestation of the rift's hunger. He turned his shifting gaze toward Chloe, the hook scraping against the floorboards. "Run," Elias commanded, but his legs felt like lead. The frequency in the room was so high now that their motor functions were beginning to seize. "We can't run," Isabel cried, her nose beginning to bleed from the acoustic pressure. "The air, it's solid." Anna Richter ignored them, her tuning fork pressed directly against the echo stone plate. The violet light intensified, turning into a blinding white glare. "Listen," Anna commanded. The sound that followed wasn't a scream. It was a roar, the collective voice of the bone garden beneath them, thousands of voices beginning to speak at once. A cacophony of 1920s whispers, 1950s radio static, and 1980s pop songs, all layered over the sound of 1,000 drownings. Elias realized the true danger. They weren't just going to be murdered. They were going to be archived. Their consciousnesses were being pulled out of their bodies to be stored in the stone, leaving their bones to join the foundation. "The journal!" Elias shouted to Julian, who was struggling to stand. "The last entry. Vane mentioned a dead air frequency. We have to mute the stone." Elias scrambled toward the lens mechanism. He saw the heavy brass weights that used to rotate the lamp. If he could drop the weights directly onto the echo stone plate, The physical impact might disrupt the resonance long enough for them to break the circuit. But as he reached for the release lever, the keeper lunged. The maritime hook swung in a wide arc, catching the sleeve of Elias's jacket and pinning him to the lens frame. "Yesterday is coming for you, Elias," the keeper rasped, his voice a chorus of dead men. "No," Elias gritted his teeth, reaching for the lever with his free hand. "Today is all we've got." He pulled the lever. The massive brass weights, weighing nearly half a ton, plummeted. They didn't hit the stone. They stopped in midair, suspended by a cushion of pure sound. Anna Richter looked up at Elias, a sad smile on her pearlescent face. "You're still thinking in physics, Elias. In the rift, gravity is just another suggestion. And right now, I'm the one making the suggestions." She struck the tuning fork one last time. The world went silent, a silence so absolute it felt like being buried alive. Then, the floor vanished entirely, and they began to fall into the white static of the bone garden. Chapter 7. The 4 a.m. Confession. The fall felt like being pulled through a straw. One moment Elias was staring into the pearlescent, terrifying eyes of Anna Richter. The next, he was slamming into a surface that felt neither like stone nor water. It was soft, yielding, like treading on a layer of compressed wool. When the white static cleared from his vision, Elias found himself standing on the pier. But it wasn't the pier he knew. The skiff was gone. The sky was a flat, featureless gray, and the Atlantic was as still as a sheet of lead. There was no wind, no scent of salt, and most importantly, no sound. Even his own heartbeat felt muffled. A distant thudding in a room 3 doors down. "Julian? Isabel," he called out. His voice didn't travel. It fell flat at his feet, as if the air itself refused to carry it. "We're here," a voice whispered behind him. He turned to see the 3 of them huddling near the rusted winch of the pier. They looked like charcoal sketches of themselves, desaturated, their colors drained by the oppressive atmosphere of the latency. "Where are we?" Chloe asked, her hands trembling. "Is this the bone garden?" "We're inside the rift," Elias said, looking up toward the lighthouse. The building was there, but it looked translucent, flickering like a dying light bulb. "Anna didn't just drop us. She shifted our frequency. We're in the dead air zone Vane wrote about." He checked his watch. The hands were spinning wildly, clockwise then counterclockwise, before snapping to a halt. 4 a.m. "It's 4 in the morning," Julian noted, his voice sounding hollow. "But it was just nearly 11 at night. How did we skip 5 hours?" "We didn't skip them," Elias realized, pointing to the cliffs. "The island is a 24-hour recording, but the dead air zone is where the master tapes are kept. Everything that happens at 4 a.m. across 100 years is happening right here, right now." Suddenly, the absolute silence was pierced. It wasn't a roar or a scream. It was a murmur, a soft, intimate conversation that seemed to vibrate out of the very wood of the pier. "I shouldn't have brought them, Julian. It was a mistake." Elias froze. He knew that voice. It was Isabel. But Isabel was standing right next to him, her mouth clamped shut in terror. "You had to," a second voice replied. It was Julian, but not the terrified Julian holding a fire poker. This version of Julian sounded cold, calculating. "The rift needs a balance of 4. 2 to stay, 2 to go. That was the deal we made with the agency." Elias stepped back, his eyes darting between the present Julian and Isabel and the voices emanating from the air. "Julian? Isabel? What is that?" Elias asked, his voice rising in pitch. I don't know," Isabel cried, backing away toward the water. "I never said that. I've been with you the whole time." "Elias is too smart." Yesterday, Isabel continued in the echo. "He's going to find the journal. He's going to find Vane's notes about the medium." "It doesn't matter," the yesterday Julian replied. By 4 a.m. tomorrow, he'll be part of the Foundation. The research data we'll get from his archiving will be worth millions. Just keep acting scared, Isabel. It's almost over. The present Julian looked down at his hands, then at Elias. Elias, listen to me. That's the rift. It's distorting things. It's making up lies to tear us apart. Is it? Elias snarled, his grief and terror turning into a sharp, focused rage. Vane's journal said the rift doesn't lie. It only repeats. That conversation happened at 4 a.m. yesterday, while I was asleep in the lighthouse. You two were down here on the pier, talking to someone. Who were you talking to? Before Julian could answer, a third voice entered the echo, a voice that made Elias's stomach drop into the abyss. Good work, agents. The boat will be back in 48 hours to collect the drives. Make sure the acoustic shadows do the heavy lifting. We don't want any physical evidence of struggle. It was the voice of the man from the mainland who had rented them the skiff. Chloe let out a sob, looking at Julian and Isabel as if they were monsters. You brought us here to be mediums. You knew about the bone garden. You knew about Anna Richter. Isabel broke. She fell to her knees, sobbing into her hands. They threatened my family, Elias. They told me if I didn't help them map the resonance, they'd archive me instead. I didn't want this. I thought we could find a way out. Julian didn't cry. He stood tall, his face hardening into the mask Elias had just heard in the echo. He dropped the fire poker. It made no sound as it hit the woolly ground. It's not an agency, Isabel, Julian said, his voice now matching the cold resonance of the rift. It's Mnemosyne, the same people who built the archive in Neo-Delft. They've been trying to weaponize the Echo Stone for years. Anna Richter didn't discover the rift. She was their lead scientist until she decided to keep the power for herself. Julian looked at Elias with a chilling lack of empathy. The 4 a.m. confession wasn't supposed to happen, Elias. You weren't supposed to be in the dead air zone, but it doesn't change the math. The island needs its bone, and right now, the frequency is perfect. Suddenly, the gray sky above them began to crack. Thousands of violet fissures appeared in the air, and the sound returned with the force of a tidal wave. It wasn't just voices anymore. The black mineral oil began to erupt from the pores of the pier, shaping itself into the flickering, translucent form of the keeper, Abelard Vane. But this time he wasn't alone. Dozens of acoustic shadows, the ghosts of everyone buried in the bone garden, rose from the leaden water. Julian, stop this! Elias screamed over the rising roar. I can't, Julian said, and for the first time, Elias saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. I'm not the one in control anymore. Look at the lighthouse. Elias looked, standing at the top of the translucent tower. Anna Richter wasn't humming anymore. She was screaming, her mouth wide, her body glowing with a blinding violet light. She was using the confession as the final vibration to shatter the dead air. She's merging the timelines. Elias realized. She's bringing the 4 a.m. of every year into the now. As the wall of sound hit them, the pier disintegrated. Elias felt the cold, black oil wrap around his ankles, pulling him down toward the 1,000-year-old skeletons below. His last thought as the static swallowed him was the final line of the 4 a.m. echo. The only way to stop a loop is to become the silence. Chapter 8. Feedback Loop. The descent into the stone was not a plunge into solid rock, but an immersion into a liquid consciousness. Elias felt the black mineral oil invade his senses, not as a fluid, but as a data stream. He was no longer falling through air. He was falling through a century of stored vibrations. He saw flashes of 1922, Abelard Vane weeping over a photograph. He heard the jazz of the 1940s distorted by the crushing weight of the seabed. He felt the cold, clinical terror of Dr. Anna Richter as she first realized the island was alive. He was inside the bone garden. Around him, the skeletal remains of the mediums weren't just bone. They were resonators. They acted like the needles of a massive, subterranean phonograph. Every time a soul was archived, its final frequency was etched into the calcium of the foundation. "Become the silence," the echo had said. Elias realized he wasn't dead, but he was no longer entirely present. He was drifting in the feedback loop, the 24-hour buffer where the island processed the now into the yesterday. Suddenly, a hand gripped his shoulder, not a physical hand, but a cold, vibrating pressure. "Elias, focus on my voice. Don't listen to the stone." He turned. It was Chloe. She looked like a ghost, her form shimmering with a pale blue light. She was flickering, a sign that the rift was trying to digest her. "Where are Julian and Isabel?" Elias asked. His voice sounded like it was coming from a distant radio station, crackling with interference. "They're above," Chloe pointed upward, through the translucent layers of the echo stone. Elias could see the soles of boots. Julian and Isabel were standing on the surface of the rift, looking down. They looked like giants, their movements slow and tectonic. "They're waiting for the extraction. Mnemosyne is sending a frequency ship to harvest the data. They think we're already archived." "We are," Elias realized, looking at his own hands. They were turning into violet glass. "But the loop works both ways, Chloe. If the island plays the past back to the present, we can play the present back to the past." Elias looked at the skeletons surrounding them. He saw one skeleton clutching a rusted locket. He recognized the name engraved on it from Vane's journal. Eleanor, Abelard Vane's wife. Vane didn't just want to hear her, Elias whispered. He wanted to feed her. He built the feedback loop so he could talk to her through time. "If I can find the frequency of this specific bone, I can send a message back to the yesterday version of myself." "But yesterday Elias is already here," Chloe cried. "He's at the lighthouse. He's about to hear the scream." Exactly. Elias's eyes lit up with a desperate, feverish light. "If I can send a warning back to yesterday Elias at 10:14 p.m., he won't go into the lighthouse. He'll take the boat and leave. If he leaves, he never enters the hidden room. If he never enters the room, the present me, this version, never falls into the stone. It's a paradox, Chloe. I have to kill my own timeline to save us." He crawled toward the skeleton of Eleanor Vane. The black oil resisted him, humming with the voices of 1,000 others who wanted to stay in the loop. They didn't want the silence. They wanted the noise. He reached the locket. He pressed his forehead against the cold, vibrating metal. He began to hum, not the discordant frequency of Anna Richter, but the low, steady tone of the 4 a.m. confession. "Elias, don't go in the lighthouse." He pushed the words into the stone. He felt the echo stone resist. It wanted the 24-hour delay. It wanted the tragedy to play out exactly as recorded. Above them, on the surface, Julian suddenly looked down. He seemed to hear something. He knelt, pressing his ear to the ground. "Elias, is that you?" Julian's voice echoed into the stone. "You're fighting the loop. Stop. You're going to cause a resonance collapse. You'll destroy the echo stone. That's the point." Elias roared, his voice now a storm of violet light. Suddenly, the feedback loop hit a peak. Elias felt his consciousness split. He saw himself standing on the pier 24 hours ago. He saw yesterday Elias looking at the fog, his watch hitting 10:14 p.m. "Look at the boat!" Elias screamed through the stone. In the past, yesterday Elias stopped. He didn't look at the lighthouse. He turned his head toward the skiff. For a microsecond, the timeline wavered. The lighthouse flickered. Dr. Anna Richter, standing in the now, atop the tower, let out a shriek of agony as her physical form began to dissolve. The paradox was tearing the rift apart. But then, the keeper, Abelard Vane, appeared beside Elias in the stone. His maritime hook didn't strike Elias. Instead, the keeper placed a hand on the locket. "It is too late for us." The keeper's voice was a gentle, terrifying sigh. "The stone has already tasted your blood. You cannot change the past, Elias. You can only overwrite the future." The keeper shoved Elias. Elias didn't fall further down. He was launched upward, through the layers of bone, through the black oil, and through the soles of Julian's boots. He burst back into the physical world, gasping for air, his skin glowing with a faint violet light. He was back in the lantern room, but it was no longer 4 a.m. It was 10:14 p.m. again, but there was one terrifying difference. The woman who was screaming at the base of the stairs wasn't an echo of Dr. Anna Richter. The voice was Chloe's, and as Elias looked at his hands, he realized he wasn't holding a journal anymore. He was holding the maritime hook. "The loop didn't break," Elias whispered, his eyes wide with horror as the feedback completed. "It just swapped the roles. I'm the keeper now." Behind him, Julian stood in the doorway, a cruel, satisfied smile on his face. "Welcome to the team, Elias," Julian said. "Now, go finish the recording. We need the 10:15 p.m. scream to be perfect." Chapter 9. Dead Air. The maritime hook felt impossibly heavy in Elias's hand, a rusted extension of a destiny he hadn't chosen. The violet glow from the echo stone plate in the floor pulsed in sync with his own racing heart, casting long, jagged shadows against the shattered glass of the lantern room. He could feel the latency crawling up his spine, a cold, numbing sensation that whispered that his past self was dead and only the machine remained. "Go on, Elias," Julian urged, stepping further into the room. He looked down at the floor, where the black mineral oil was beginning to recede, leaving behind a shimmering, crystalline residue. "The rift is hungry. It has a gap in the timeline now because you tried to change the past. The only way to stabilize the island, to save the rest of us, is to provide the sound the stone expects." "You want me to kill Chloe?" Elias rasped. His voice sounded like it was being filtered through a century of salt and static. It wasn't his voice anymore. It was a composite of every keeper who had ever stood on this rock. "I want you to complete the recording," Julian corrected, his eyes cold and clinical. "The island doesn't care about the who. It only cares about the frequency. Chloe is already at the bottom of the stairs. She's terrified. Her adrenaline is peaking. That's the high-grade resonance Mnemosyne needs." Downstairs, the scream erupted again. "Please, stop, please." It was Chloe's voice. It was raw, shredding the silence of the 10:14 p.m. slot. But as Elias listened, he realized the terrifying nature of the dead air. Chloe wasn't being attacked by a person. She was being attacked by the acoustic shadow of the event Elias had heard earlier. The island was forcing her to reenact the murder of Anna Richter, using her body as a vessel for the past. "If I don't go down there," Elias whispered, "the loop will collapse, won't it? The island will just keep pulling from the future until it finds a scream that fits." "Exactly," Julian said, "and the next voice it takes might be yours, or Isabel's, or 1,000 people on the coast. Do your job, Elias. Be the silence." Elias turned and began to descend the spiral stairs. Every step felt like a betrayal of physics. The iron steps were no longer solid. They felt like they were made of hardened sound, vibrating beneath his boots. As he reached the second-floor landing, the dead air hit him. The dead air wasn't just silence. It was a sensory vacuum. He couldn't feel the temperature. He couldn't smell the damp. He only heard the internal mechanical whirring of his own cybernetic-like state. He reached the base of the stairs. Chloe was there, pinned against the stone wall by an invisible force. Her eyes were rolled back in her head, her throat working convulsively as the island forced the 10:14 p.m. plea out of her lungs. Her fingernails were clawing at the stone, exactly like the sound they had heard earlier. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Chloe, Elias breathed. She turned her head. For a brief second, the possession broke. Her eyes cleared, and she saw him, standing there with the rusted hook, glowing with a ghostly violet light. Elias, she wheezed. Don't let it finish. Elias raised the hook. He could feel the island's will pushing his arm down. The echo stone foundation beneath the floor was humming, a deep, sub-bass vibration that demanded the wet, gurgling choke to close the circuit. But Elias looked at the stone wall where they had found the hidden alcove. He remembered the journal. To break the angel is to break the seal. He didn't swing the hook at Chloe. He swung it at the iron railing of the stairs. Clang. The sound was massive and unplanned, unrecorded intrusion into the 10:15 p.m. timeline. The dead air shattered. The vibration traveled down the hook, through Elias's arm, and directly into the stone floor. The island screamed in protest. The acoustic shadow that was pinning Chloe evaporated in a cloud of static. Elias, what are you doing? Julian's voice boomed from the top of the stairs, now filled with genuine panic. You're introducing noise into the master tape. You'll trigger a feedback explosion. I'm not being your silence, Julian, Elias shouted, swinging the hook again, hitting the iron steps, the stone wall, the heavy kitchen door. Clang, crack, thud. He was creating a noise floor, a chaotic, unpredictable sequence of sounds that the rift couldn't archive. As the chaos of the noise grew, a third sound emerged. It wasn't an echo, and it wasn't the present. It was a rhythmic, digital pulsing. Bip, bip, bip. Elias looked at the walls. The stone was cracking, revealing not more bone, but a network of fiber optic cables embedded deep within the masonry. This isn't just a natural phenomenon, Elias realized, his eyes widening. The lithic resonance, the echo stone, it's been augmented. The lighthouse isn't just a building. It's a massive biological hard drive. He looked up at Julian. Julian wasn't just a traitor or an agent. As the noise disrupted Julian's own frequency shield, his skin began to flicker, revealing the same violet veins as Anna Richter. You're not Julian, Elias whispered, the hook trembling in his hand. You're a version 8. You're a synthetic auditor sent to manage the drive. The Julian entity stopped pretending. His face smoothed out into a featureless, clinical mask. The noise is irrelevant, Elias. You have already provided enough data. The dead air was never about the murder. It was about your reaction to it. Human defiance is the most complex frequency to map. Thank you for the contribution. The Julian figure raised his hand, and the fiber optic cables in the walls began to glow with a blinding white light. The extraction is commencing, the machine voice said. The island is being wiped. Everything, the echoes, the bones, and the witnesses, will be deleted to make room for the next recording. Elias grabbed Chloe's hand. The boat. We have to get to the boat before the wipe hits the pier. We can't, Chloe cried, pointing to the hallway. The black oil, it's turning into a wall. Elias looked at the rusted maritime hook. He looked at the glowing cables. He realized there was only one way to stop a digital wipe in a biological system. He had to crash the system with a zero-day sound, a sound so ancient and so powerful that the Mnemosyne hardware couldn't process it. He turned to the stairs, looked up at the Julian entity, and he didn't scream. He didn't shout. He began to tell the island a secret so private, so deeply human, that it had never been recorded in the 24-hour loop. He whispered the name of the woman he had loved and lost long before he ever came to this island, a name that wasn't in any database. The cables hissed. The violet light turned to a muddy brown. The Julian entity let out a digital shriek as the human noise infected the clean data stream. "Run!" Elias yelled. "The system is crashing." They bolted for the door, the lighthouse behind them beginning to dissolve into a cloud of static and bone. Chapter 10. The Frequency of Blood. The lighthouse didn't just crumble, it unraveled. As Elias and Chloe burst through the heavy oak doors, the stone behind them began to liquefy into a static-filled slurry. The fiber-optic cables, once hidden in the masonry, lashed out like dying nerves, sparking with the raw, unedited data of a century. The island was no longer a solid mass of basalt and earth. It was a digital fever dream. Every step Elias took felt like treading on the surface of a broken television screen. The fog had turned into a white noise blizzard, tiny crystalline shards of frozen sound that cut through their clothes like razors. "Don't look back!" Elias roared over the cacophony, but Chloe stumbled. She didn't trip over a rock. She tripped over a sound. A solid, invisible vibration of a storm from 1954 had materialized across the path, a wall of pressurized wind that existed only in a 3-foot slice of space. "Elias, my legs! I can't feel my legs!" Elias skidded to a halt, the maritime hook sparking as it dragged against the static-drenched ground. He looked at Chloe and felt a surge of pure terror. Her lower body was beginning to desaturate, turning into the same gray, grainy dead air they had seen on the pier. The system crash wasn't just deleting the lighthouse, it was deleting the mediums. The island thinks we're part of the corruption, Elias realized. He lunged back for her, but a new sound erupted from the ground between them. "Help me! Somebody help me!" It was a voice from the 1920s, a frantic, bubbling plea. As the sound manifested, the ground literally tore open, not a crack in the earth, but a rift in the timeline. Elias looked down and saw, for a fleeting second, the interior of the lighthouse as it looked 100 years ago, pristine, lit by oil lamps, with a younger Abelard Vane standing in the kitchen. Then, the frequency of blood hit. It was a low-frequency thrumming that didn't hit the ears. It hit the veins. Elias felt the iron in his blood vibrate in sympathy with the echo stone. It was a rhythmic, pulsing heat that moved from his feet to his skull. "They're using our biology as a conductor," Elias screamed, grabbing Chloe's hand. The contact sent a jolt of violet electricity through his arm. "They're trying to use our blood to stabilize the crash." Suddenly, the Julian entity appeared. He wasn't walking. He was gliding atop a wave of black mineral oil, his synthetic skin now completely gone. He was a humanoid shape of glowing violet cables and shifting static. "The secret was a valiant attempt, Elias." The entity's voice resonated through the very marrow of their bones. "But the human heart is just another frequency, and blood is the perfect antenna." The entity raised a hand, and the white noise blizzard intensified. The shards of sound began to swarm around Elias and Chloe, forming a vortex. Within the vortex, Elias saw the ghosts. Not just the keeper, but the hundreds of people who had been archived. They were no longer flickering shadows. They were being pulled into the present by the blood frequency. "Give us your life," 1,000 voices whispered in unison. "Give us your pulse. We want to be loud again." "The hook," Chloe gasped, her face turning translucent. "Elias, the hook is made of the same iron as the lighthouse frame. It's a lightning rod." Elias looked at the rusted maritime hook. He realized what he had to do. If the island was using their blood as an antenna, he had to give it a better one. He didn't swing the hook at Julian. He swung it at his own palm. The pain was a white-hot flare that shattered the dead air around him. He gripped the iron hook with his bleeding hand, the red liquid coating the rusted metal. "You want a frequency?" Elias challenged the storm, his voice cracking with agony. "Take mine." He slammed the blood-soaked hook into one of the exposed fiber-optic nerves protruding from the ground. The result was a resonance explosion. The frequency of blood traveled down the iron, hitting the mnemosiny network like a physical hammer. The vortex of ghosts let out a collective shriek as their data structures were flooded with the chaotic, biological reality of Elias's pain. The Julian entity buckled, his cable frame twisting and snapping. The violet light turned a violent, bruised red. The loop is bleeding, the entity hissed, before dissipating into a cloud of binary dust. The pressure in Elias's ears vanished. The dead air around Chloe's legs evaporated, her color returning in a sudden, painful rush. The boat, Elias wheezed, clutching his hand. We have to get to the boat before the island finishes its hard reset. They scrambled down the final slope toward the pier, but as they reached the water's edge, they saw the final horror of the frequency. The skiff wasn't there. Instead, sitting in the water, was a massive, silent mnemosiny extraction ship. It was a black, angular slab of carbon fiber, completely invisible to radar, huming with a sound that felt like the end of the world. And standing on the deck, looking down at them through a pair of sharp, rectangular spectacles, was Elena Davenport. "The audit is nearly complete, Mr. Barrington," she said, her voice amplified by a long-range acoustic device. "But you've caused quite a mess in the subsectors. I think it's time we brought you in for a manual review." "Where is Isabel?" Elias shouted, his blood dripping onto the sand. Elena Davenport stepped aside, revealing Isabel standing behind her. Isabel wasn't a prisoner. She was holding a tablet, her face cold and distant. "Isabel, no," Chloe whispered. "I told you, Elias," Isabel said, her voice sounding flat over the speaker. "The past is a debt, and the Barringtons, the people who fund this island, always collect." Suddenly, the 24-hour rift gave one final, dying gasp. From the empty air behind Elias and Chloe, a sound emerged. It was the sound of a boat engine. Their boat, from yesterday, the yesterday skiff, was appearing in the timeline, a ghostly, transparent vessel exactly where they had anchored it 24 hours ago. The ghost boat, Elias realized. It's a physical echo. If we can get on it before the 24-hour window closes, we can ride the resonance out of the zone. You'll be trapped in the past. Elena Davenport warned from the ship. You'll be a loop forever. Better a loop, Elias said, grabbing Chloe and leaping toward the transparent, vibrating skiff, than a memory in your machine. As they hit the deck of the ghost boat, the island behind them let out one final, world-ending roar of static. Chapter 11. The Silence of the Grave. The jump onto the yesterday skiff felt like leaping into a freezing lake of pressurized air. For a heart-stopping second, Elias and Chloe were suspended in the between, the thin, shimmering membrane where the 24-hour rift separated the present from the past. Then, the world solidified with a bone-jarring thud. Elias hit the deck of the boat, the rusted iron vibrating with a low-frequency hum that made his teeth ache. He scrambled to his feet, pulling Chloe up with him. The island had changed. The towering mnemosiny ship was gone. The white noise blizzard had vanished. Instead, the air was unnervingly still, filled with a soft, amber glow from a sunset that had happened exactly 24 hours ago. "We're back," Chloe whispered, her voice sounding thin and distant, as if she were being heard through a layer of glass. "We're in the yesterday." Elias looked at his watch. 4:10 p.m. He looked toward the pier. Standing there, just 50 yards away, were the yesterday versions of themselves. He saw his own past self, secured the ropes. He saw Julian laughing. He saw Isabel, the Isabel who hadn't yet been revealed as an infiltrator, pointing toward the lighthouse. "It's us," Chloe breathed, reaching out as if to wave. "Don't," Elias grabbed her hand. If the rift detects a double occupancy in the same space-time, it'll trigger a resonance collapse. We have to stay in the acoustic shadow. We're ghosts here, Chloe. We're the sounds that haven't been heard yet. He looked at his wounded hand. The blood was no longer red. It was a glowing violet ichor, pulsing with the rhythm of the island. He realized with a jolt of horror that they weren't just visitors in the past. They were the echoes. Elias, look at the lighthouse. Chloe pointed upward. In the yesterday timeline, the lighthouse was still pristine. The windows weren't shattered. The iron wasn't bleeding oil. But standing on the outdoor gallery was a figure Elias didn't recognize from his first day on the island. It was Abelard Vane, the real, physical Vane from 1924, but he was flickering, his body a patchwork of different decades. He was looking directly at the present versions of Elias and Chloe on the skiff. He sees us, Elias whispered. The keeper is the only one who can see both sides of the rift. Suddenly, the yesterday Julian on the pier stopped laughing. He turned his head toward the skiff, his eyes squinting against the amber light. Do you hear that? The past, Chloe asked in the air around them. Hear what? The past, Julian replied. They were hearing the sounds Elias and Chloe were making now. The heavy breathing, the scuff of boots on the deck. The recording was happening in real time. We're the unscheduled ghost. Elias realized, his heart hammering. Everything we do now is what we heard yesterday. The scream, the thump drag, it's not someone else. It's us. A wave of crushing despair hit him. The silence of the grave wasn't just the quiet of the island. It was the realization that the loop was perfect. They hadn't escaped to the past to change it. They had come back to fulfill it. Elias, if we're the sounds, then the 10:14 p.m. scream. Chloe's eyes went wide with terror. That was me. That means in 6 hours, you're going to... No. Elias gritted his teeth, the violet light in his veins flaring. I won't. I'll break the record. But the island had other plans. From the shadows of the yesterday lighthouse, a sound emerged. It wasn't an echo. It was a high-frequency whistle, the sound of an Amosany tuning fork. Elena Davenport wasn't just in the present. As the head of the audit, she had the technology to step into the latency as well. She appeared on the pier, standing right behind the oblivious past versions of the group. She looked like a smudge in reality, a gray ghost in a world of amber. You can't hide in the buffer, Elias. Elena's voice whispered through the rift. The loop requires its medium. If you won't play your part, I will simply delete the yesterday version of you. And if the past you dies before he enters the lighthouse, the present you will cease to exist in a puff of paradox. She raised a silenced pistol, aiming it at the back of the past, Elias's head. Stop! Elias roared, but his voice didn't travel to Elena. It traveled into the rift. On the pier, the past, Elias suddenly stopped. He felt a shiver, the same shiver the book's title promised. He turned around, looking directly at the empty air where Elena stood. Elias, you okay? The past, Isabel asked. Yeah. Past, Elias replied, rubbing the back of his neck. Just felt like someone was walking over my grave. Elias realized the only way to save his past self was to provide a distraction. He grabbed the maritime hook and slammed it against the side of the skiff. Clang! The sound was massive. In the yesterday timeline, the group on the pier jumped. What was that? Past, Julian yelled, looking toward the water. The sound distracted Elena Davenport for a split second. She lowered the gun, her gray form flickering with annoyance. You're making a mess of the recording, Elias. But you've just confirmed the 4 p.m. echo we heard earlier. You're a very helpful ghost. Elias looked at Chloe. We have to get to the recording angel plate, not the one in the lighthouse, the one under the island. Vane's journal said there's a master switch in the bone garden that can mute the entire rift. But the bone garden is beneath the stone, Chloe cried. We'll have to bury ourselves. No, Elias said, looking at the violet ichor dripping from his hand. We don't bury ourselves. We resonate. If we can match the frequency of the island, we can slip through the cracks in the recording. He grabbed Chloe's hand, and together they began to hum. Not a secret this time, but a song. A simple, childhood melody that Chloe had hummed the night before by the fire. The island resisted. The amber light turned a violent, bruised purple. The silence of the grave was replaced by a roar of a century of stored screams, all trying to drown out their song. But as they reached the frequency of the stone, the pier beneath them began to turn translucent. They weren't falling. They were melting into the past. As they sank into the ground, Elias saw the final yesterday image of himself. His past self was looking at the lighthouse, his face filled with curiosity and hope. I'm sorry, Elias whispered into the static. They fell into the dark, heading for the master switch, while above them, the 10:14 p.m. countdown began its final, inevitable tick. Chapter 12. The Final Resonance. The master switch was not a lever or a button. It was a cathedral of calcified sound. As Elias and Chloe plummeted through the final layer of the yesterday crust, they didn't hit the bone garden's floor. They suspended in a central chamber beneath the lighthouse's very heart, the core of the angel. Here, the echo stone wasn't just a plate. It was a massive, jagged stalactite of violet crystal that pulsed with the captured rhythm of 100 years. The air was thick with latency. It felt like walking through invisible cobwebs made of whispers. Every movement Elias made created a ripple in the static, playing back fragments of conversations from 1922, 1984, and 2005 simultaneously. Elias, look at the crystal. Chloe pointed. Deep inside the translucent violet stone, they could see them. Thousands of tiny, glowing sparks. Each spark was a captured moment, a medium that had been fully archived. And at the very center of the stone sat the silence. A dark, hollow space that looked like a human silhouette. That's Vane's wife, Elias whispered, his voice vibrating with the stone's hum. The original recording, the one that started the hunger. You should not have come to the center, a voice boomed, but it didn't come from the air. It came from the violet light itself. Elena Davenport materialized in front of the crystal. She was no longer a gray smudge. Here, in the core of the resonance, she looked like a goddess of glass. Her skin was a map of fiber optic nerves, and her eyes were twin spinning gears of data. The loop is the only thing keeping the world stable, Mr. Barrington, Elena said, her voice a perfect, terrifying chord. If you mute the island, you don't just save yourselves. You delete the history of everyone who has ever lived here. You are committing a digital genocide to satisfy your own survival instinct. It's not history if it's a prison, Elias shouted. He raised the maritime hook, which was now glowing so brightly with violet energy that it began to hum a high, piercing note. You're not preserving them. You're farming them. Elena Davenport raised her hand, and the bone garden around them began to shake. The skeletons fused into the walls, started to vibrate at a lethal frequency. The audit requires a conclusion, she commanded. The dark silhouette inside the crystal, the silence of Eleanor Vane, began to shift. It wasn't a memory. It was a mirror. Elias looked into the hollow space and saw himself. Not the yesterday Elias. Not the present Elias. He saw a version of himself that was already a part of the stone. The loop isn't 24 hours, Elias realized, a cold wave of clarity washing over him. It's a perfect circle. I didn't come here to break the recording. I am the recording. Every version of me that has ever tried to stop this island is already in the stone. He saw the others, Dozens of Eliases from different iterations, all holding the hook, all standing in this exact spot. "You can't win, Elias," Elena said, her voice pitying. "You've done this 100 times, and every time you choose to strike the stone. And every time, the resonance from the impact is what powers the next 24-hour cycle. Your defiance is the battery." Chloe looked at Elias, her form flickering wildly. "Elias, if your hit is the battery, then we don't hit it." "If I don't hit it, she'll archive us manually," Elias said. "No," Chloe whispered, her eyes clear for the first time since they arrived. "Become the silence. Remember? The 4 a.m. confession. The only way to stop a loop is to not react." Elias looked at the violet crystal. He looked at the maritime hook, vibrating with the energy of 1,000 failed attempts. He looked at Elena Davenport, waiting for him to strike, waiting for the noise she needed to restart the world. Elias let out a long, slow breath. He didn't swing. He dropped the maritime hook. The iron made a soft thud as it hit the woolly ground. It was a mundane, quiet sound. It wasn't a resonance. It wasn't a frequency. It was just a piece of metal falling in the dirt. The island screamed. The violet crystal began to dim. Without the defiance frequency to feed it, the echo stone couldn't maintain the 24-hour latency. The yesterday amber light began to bleed into the today static. "What are you doing?" Elena shrieked, her form beginning to glitch. "The loop is failing. You're deleting the archive." "I'm letting them go," Elias said. He sat down on the ground. He grabbed Chloe's hand. He didn't hum. He didn't whisper. He just sat in the absolute, terrifying silence of the moment. One by one, the glowing sparks inside the crystal began to drift out. The mediums, the thousands of souls captured over a century, were no longer being held by the loop. They weren't ghosts anymore. They were just vibrations, dissipating into the Atlantic air, finally allowed to fade. Abelard Vane appeared one last time. He wasn't the keeper now. He was just a tired old man. He looked at Elias, gave a slow, solemn nod, and then he, too, vanished into the gray. Elena Davenport let out a final, digital roar of frustration before her body shattered into 1,000,000 shards of silent data. The lighthouse above them groaned. Without the echo stone to hold it together, the structure finally surrendered to 100 years of salt and rot. Elias closed his eyes as the world collapsed. Epilogue: the unrecorded day. Elias woke up on a beach. It wasn't the black rocks of Echo Island. It was the soft, white sand of the mainland, 3 miles south of the harbor. The sun was rising, a warm, orange sun that felt real on his skin. Beside him, Chloe was stirring, her breath steady and rhythmic. Elias looked toward the horizon. The mist had cleared completely. Where Echo Island should have been, there was only empty water. The rift had closed. The acoustic shadow had finally been cast. He looked at his hand. The violet ichor was gone. The wound was a simple, clean scar. He checked his watch. 8 a.m. He spoke, his voice sounding strange and new in the open air. "Chloe, can you hear me?" Chloe sat up, rubbing her eyes. She listened to the waves hitting the shore. She listened to a distant gull crying. She looked at Elias and smiled. "Yeah," she whispered. "And for the first time, there's no echo." Elias stood up and looked at the ocean. He knew that Mnemosyne was still out there. He knew that Isabel and the audit wouldn't just disappear. But as he turned his back on the water, he realized he didn't need a journal or a recording to know what had happened. Some stories aren't meant to be archived. They are meant to be lived once and then whispered into the wind. The ledger was closed. The silence was finally theirs.
Thank you for listening to this production of Shiver Audiobooks. We hope the haunting frequencies of Echo Island kept you gripped until the final resonance. If the mystery of the 10:14 p.m. scream and the secrets of the Bone Garden kept you on the edge of your seat, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support is the energy that allows us to keep digging up these buried transmissions. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a new release. We have many more dark histories waiting to be unmapped, and we wouldn't want you to be lost in the static. The loop has been broken, and the past is finally silent. Until next time, stay vigilant and listen closely to the silence.